Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step out onto a wide breathing expanse of land that seems to stretch forever, where the sky feels larger than anything you have ever known, and the ground beneath your boots is dry, uneven, and quietly unforgiving. You pause for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the sheer openness the way the horizon refuses to come any closer no matter how long you look at it. It is beautiful in that slow and distant kind of way. It is also a place that does not care whether you make it through the night. You probably won't survive this, at least not comfortably. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. There is something quietly comforting about knowing who else is out there drifting into sleep alongside you. Now dim the lights. You shift your weight slightly, your boots pressing into the dry grass, and the sound is softer than you expect. The ground here has a kind of give to it, not soft like a forest floor, but layered, almost brittle. The wind moves steadily across the plains, brushing past your coat, slipping through seams, touching your skin in a way that feels both gentle and persistent. It does not ask permission, it simply exists, and you adjust to it. This is the American frontier in the 1870s, though. Out here, time does not feel like it belongs to calendars. It feels measured in distance, in weather, in how far you can see before something interrupts your line of sight. Which right now is not much. A commonly accepted historical understanding notes that after the American Civil War, large numbers of settlers began moving westward, encouraged by policies like the Homestead Act, which promised land to those willing to claim and work it. On paper, it sounds almost generous. A chance at independence, ownership, a fresh beginning. Out here, though, you quickly realize that land is not the same as comfort, is not even the same as survival. You take a few steps forward and each one feels deliberate. There are no roads in the way you're used to. No neat boundaries, just faint trails worn by wagons and hooves, and even those seem to fade into nothing if you stop paying attention. The air smells faintly of dust and dry grass, with a sharper note that might be distant animals, or simply the land itself, warming under the sun. You inhale slowly, testing it as if your body is trying to decide whether this place is friend or threat. It does not give you an answer. Far in the distance you notice movement. At first it is only a suggestion, something that could easily be a trick of the light. Then it resolves into a small cluster of figures. Wagons, perhaps. People, certainly. You are not as alone as you thought, though the distance between you and them still feels enormous. You begin walking again, your pace unhurried, partly because there is no reason to rush, and partly because you're already conserving energy without fully realizing it. Out here, every movement carries a quiet cost. You feel it in your legs, in the way your shoulders settle, in how your breathing adjusts to a slower rhythm. There is a peculiar detail that does not always make it into the grand stories of the West. Some travelers reported that the constant wind across the plains could play tricks on the mind, creating low-humming sounds that seemed almost like distant voices. It is not entirely clear whether this was a physical phenomenon or simply the result of long days and longer silences. Either way, you find yourself listening now, just in case. The sound of the wind shifts slightly, rising and falling as it passes over uneven ground. For a moment, you could almost believe it is trying to say something. Then it fades again into something simpler. Just air moving across land that has been here far longer than you. You glance down at your hands. There is already a thin layer of dust settling along your skin, collecting in the small lines of your knuckles. It feels dry, almost chalky. You brush it away and it returns almost immediately, as if the land is gently insisting that you become part of it. Historians still argue whether the settlers who first came out here truly understood what they were walking into, or if the promises of land and independence overshadowed the harsher realities waiting for them. It is easy from a distance to imagine courage and determination as enough. Standing here with the wind tugging at your clothes and the horizon refusing to offer any clear answers, you begin to suspect that something more was required. Something quieter, endurance, perhaps. You keep moving, and the figures ahead slowly grow more distinct. The shapes of wagons become clearer, their outlines rigid against the soft movement of the grass. You can make out animals now, horses, maybe oxen. People walking beside them, their steps steady, their posture slightly forward as if leaning into the journey itself. You realize with a small shift in awareness that you are joining something. Not just a place, but a movement. A slow ongoing push across land that does not yield easily. The sun sits high above you and the light feels different here. It is not filtered through trees or softened by buildings. It falls directly clean and bright, casting sharp shadows that stretch beneath your feet. You squint slightly, your eyes adjusting your body, learning how to exist under this kind of openness. There is no immediate danger, at least not in the obvious sense, no sudden threats rushing toward you. But there is a constant underlying awareness that things could change quickly. Weather distance, illness, simple mistakes. Out here, problems do not need to be dramatic to be serious. You take another slow breath, letting it settle in your chest. The air feels thinner somehow, though that might just be your imagination adjusting to unfamiliar surroundings. You exhale, and for a moment everything feels still. Not silent, never truly silent, but still enough that your thoughts begin to stretch out, matching the landscape around you. Ahead, the small group continues its steady progress, and you follow your footsteps falling into a quiet rhythm. There is no rush, no immediate destination that demands urgency, just movement. Just the gradual unfolding of a life that will be shaped day by day by the land beneath you and the sky above. And as you walk, you begin to understand something simple, something that does not need to be said out loud. This place is not here to welcome you. It is here, and you are the one who must adjust. The wind brushes past you again, a little cooler now, as if the day is already beginning its slow turn toward evening. You pull your coat slightly closer, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Small adjustments, small awareness. You keep walking. You draw a little closer to the moving shapes ahead, and what once looked like a distant blur now begins to resolve into something more structured. Wagons creak forward in a slow, steady line, their wooden wheels turning with a rhythm that feels almost tired. Canvas covers ripple gently in the wind, stretched over curved frames, offering shade that seems more symbolic than truly protective. The people walking alongside them do not look surprised to see you. Out here, new faces are expected. No one asks too many questions right away. You fall into step near the edge of the group, matching their pace without needing to be told. It is not fast, it is not slow, it is simply what can be sustained. As you walk, the sounds begin to layer themselves around you. The low murmur of voices, quiet and practical. The occasional creak of wood under strain. The soft clink of metal tools shifting with each movement. Somewhere an animal snorts, shaking its head, and you catch the earthy scent of it carried briefly on the breeze. Ahead, you notice something rising from the land that interrupts the endless flatness. At first, it looks like nothing more than a darker line against the horizon. Then, as you approach, shapes begin to form. Buildings. Or something close enough to buildings to count. A frontier town. It does not appear gradually in the way a city might with suburbs and clear boundaries. It simply emerges. One moment you're in open land, the next there are structures scattered across the ground as if they were placed there in a hurry and never quite arranged properly afterward. A well-known historical record tells us that many towns in the American West during the 1870s appeared almost overnight, often following the discovery of resources like gold or simply the expansion of rail and trade routes. People arrived quickly, built quickly, and hoped stability would follow later. Looking at the place ahead of you, you begin to understand what that really means. The first building you pass is little more than a wooden frame with rough planks nailed into place. The boards do not quite line up. Gaps let thin streams of light slip through, and you imagine they would also let in wind dust and anything else that felt like passing through. A hand-painted sign hangs above the entrance, its letters uneven but determined. It promises goods. It does not specify quality. You step onto a stretch of wooden planks laid across the dirt, forming a kind of walkway. The boards shift slightly under your weight, not dangerously, but enough to remind you that nothing here is entirely solid yet. Beneath the planks, the ground is churned and dry, marked by footprints, wagon tracks, and the occasional darker patch where something has spilled or soaked in. The air feels different here. Still dusty, still dry, but layered now with other smells. Wood smoke drifts from somewhere nearby, thin and persistent. There is the sharp tang of leather, the faint sweetness of something cooking, and underneath it all, the less pleasant but very real presence of animals, and too many people in a space not quite ready to hold them. You glance around as you walk. A blacksmith works just ahead, his hammer striking metal in a steady rhythm. Each impact rings out clearly, the sound sharp against the open air. Sparks jump briefly bright and fleeting before disappearing into the dust. The smell of heated iron reaches you warm and metallic. A little further on you catch sight of a saloon. The doors swing lazily as someone steps out, letting a brief spill of sound escapes. Laughter music that is slightly out of tune, the low hum of conversation. It feels almost out of place against the vast quiet you just crossed, like a pocket of noise held together by willpower alone. There is a curious detail that sometimes surprises people when they look back at these places. Some frontier towns included amenities that seem oddly ambitious for their rough surroundings, such as small theatres or makeshift newspapers printed on basic presses. It is as if even here people were trying to recreate pieces of a more settled life, even when the ground beneath them had not quite agreed to cooperate yet. You slow your steps slightly, taking it all in. There is movement everywhere, but it is not chaotic. It is purposeful even when it looks improvised. People carry water in buckets, their arms steady despite the weight. Others stack supplies, adjusting and readjusting, as if trying to convince the piles to behave. A pair of men argue quietly over something you cannot quite hear, their voices low but firm. Historians continue to discuss whether these rapidly built towns were driven more by optimism or necessity. Some suggest that hope played a central role, a belief that stability would come if enough effort was applied. Others point out that many people simply had no better options, and so they built where they stood, making do with what they had. As you watch the careful, repetitive motions around you, it feels like a mix of both. You step off the wooden walkway for a moment, your boot sinking slightly into the dirt. It is dry on the surface, but there is a faint give beneath, as if the ground remembers moisture that has not been there for some time. You lift your foot and a small cloud of dust rises, catching the light before settling again. A woman passes by carrying a basket, her steps measured and steady. She does not look at you directly, but there is an awareness there, a quiet acknowledgement of your presence. Everyone here seems to notice everything, even if they do not show it openly. Near the edge of the town, you spot a cluster of tents, their fabric pulled tight and secured with ropes that disappear into the ground. They look temporary, though you suspect some of them have been standing longer than intended. A few people move between them, adjusting flaps, securing lines, performing small acts of maintenance that keep everything from falling apart. You take a slow breath and the air feels thicker here, filled with the traces of many lives layered together. It is not entirely comfortable, but it is alive in a way the open plains were not. As you continue walking, you begin to notice the sounds changing again. The wind is still there, but it is softer now, broken up by the structures that interrupt its path. In its place you hear more human noise, footsteps on wood, voices drifting in and out, the occasional sharp call of someone trying to be heard across the space. And yet even here the vastness has not disappeared. You can still see the open land just beyond the last row of buildings, stretching out as far as it did before. The town does not replace the frontier. It sits within it, small and temporary, like a pause rather than a conclusion. You find yourself moving more slowly now, your attention pulled in different directions at once. There is so much to take in, so much that feels unfinished in progress, uncertain. You realize quietly that this place is not yet a destination. It is a moment, a gathering point in the middle of something much larger. You step back onto the wooden planks, feeling them shift slightly beneath you, and continue forward. You drift past the last cluster of rough buildings, and the town loosens its grip on your senses almost immediately. The sounds soften behind you. The hammering fades. The voices blur into something indistinct. Ahead, the land opens again, but not quite in the same way as before. Now there are signs of people pressing themselves into it, shaping it, and negotiating with it. A short distance from the main street, you begin to notice the homes. They are not arranged neatly. There is no grid, no careful planning. Each one stands where it could be built, where the ground allowed it, where someone decided to stop moving and try to stay. You step toward the nearest structure, drawn by curiosity and something quieter, something like recognition. It is a wooden cabin, though. That word feels a little generous. The logs are uneven, some thicker than others, stacked with visible gaps that have been filled with mud, straw, or whatever else could be pressed into service. The roof slopes slightly to one side, covered in rough shingles that look as though they were shaped more by necessity than precision. You reach out and rest your hand against the wall. The wood is dry and textured, warm from the sun. It feels solid, but only just. You can imagine how it would sound in strong wind, the faint creak, the subtle shifting that never quite lets you forget that this is a structure held together by effort more than certainty. A widely accepted historical observation notes that many frontier settlers built their first homes quickly, often with little experience in construction, using whatever materials were available nearby. Lumber, when it could be found or transported, was valuable. In places where trees were scarce, people turned to alternatives that might seem unusual to modern eyes. You turn slightly and notice one of those alternatives not far away. At first, it looks like a low rise in the ground, almost as if the earth itself has been shaped into a dwelling. As you approach, the details become clearer. Blocks of sod, thick with grass roots, have been cut from the land and stacked into walls. The grass still clings to them now, turned slightly brown, giving the structure a muted living texture. This is a sod house. You pause outside it, studying the way it blends into the landscape. It does not stand apart like the wooden cabin. It seems to emerge from the earth itself as if it had always been here and simply change shape. You step closer and the air feels cooler near the shaded side. You imagine what it must be like inside. Darker, certainly. Perhaps a little damp. The smell of soil lingering in the air, especially after rain. But also insulated in a way that the wooden cabin is not. Protected in its own quiet way. There is a small, almost unexpected detail that some accounts mention. In certain sod houses, especially those left unattended for a time, grass and even small plants could begin to grow from the roof, fed by the same soil that formed the walls. Imagine that for a moment. A house that tries gently to become part of the land again, even as you are trying to hold it in place. You walk between the two structures, feeling the subtle difference in temperature, in texture, in the way each one responds to the environment. Neither feels entirely comfortable, neither feels entirely secure, and yet both represent something significant. A decision to stay. You notice signs of life around them. A simple wooden stool near the cabin door, a line strung between two posts with a few pieces of clothing hanging stiffly in the dry air, a bucket half full with a thin layer of dust already settling on the surface of the water. You crouch slightly and touch the ground. It is firmer here, packed down by repeated footsteps. This is not untouched land anymore. It has been shaped, however, lightly by routine. Historians still debate whether sod houses were seen as temporary solutions or accepted as long-term homes by the people who built them. Some evidence suggests that settlers intended to replace them with wooden structures when possible. Other accounts indicate that many lived in them for years, adapting to their quirks, finding ways to make them more livable over time. Standing here, it feels like the kind of choice that is not always a choice. You use what you have. A door opens nearby and you glance up. A figure steps out of the cabin, pausing briefly in the doorway. Their movements are steady, practiced. They close the door behind them with a firm push, as if making sure it stays where it is supposed to. There is a brief moment where your eyes meet a quiet acknowledgement. Not curiosity, not surprise, just awareness. You nod slightly and they return it, then continue on with whatever task had brought them outside. There is something about that exchange that settles into you. A sense that out here, people do not waste energy on unnecessary reactions. Everything is measured, intentional, saved for where it matters. You stand again and take a slow breath. The air carries a mix of scents. Dry grass, sun-warmed wood, a faint trace of cooking from somewhere you cannot quite see. It is not unpleasant, but it is not comforting in the way you might expect from the word home. You step toward another structure, this one somewhere between the cabin and the sod house. A frame of wood with walls partially filled, as if the builder started with one idea and adjusted along the way. You can see the marks of tools, the uneven cuts, the places where something did not quite fit and was forced into place anyway. It reminds you quietly that nothing here is finished. Everything is in progress. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of a doorway. The wood is rough, catching slightly against your skin. You imagine the effort it took to shape it, to bring it here, to fit it into place without the precision tools you might expect today. Another small detail comes to mind, one that feels almost out of place in its simplicity. Some settlers reportedly stuffed cracks in their walls with cloth paper, even old clothing to block out wind and dust. It is such a small act, and yet it carries a certain intimacy. Pieces of life repurposed to hold back the elements. You step back and look at the cluster of homes as a whole. They do not form a perfect line, they do not match, and yet there is a kind of cohesion in their shared purpose. Each one stands as a statement, quiet but firm. We are here, for now at least. The wind moves through again, brushing past the walls, slipping into the smallest openings, testing the boundaries that have been set against it. You feel it on your face, cooler now, carrying the hint that the day will not stay warm forever. You pull your coat slightly closer, your body responding without needing to think about it. You realize slowly that comfort here is not about softness or ease. It is about shelter that holds just enough. It is about walls that stand through the night. It is about small adjustments that keep you moving forward. You turn your gaze back toward the town, then out toward the open land beyond it. Between those two spaces, these homes sit quietly, bridging something that has not yet fully settled. You take a step forward, then another. Your movements unhurried, your attention still lingering on the details you have just seen. And as you walk, you carry with you a new understanding. Out here, a home is not a given. It is something you build piece by piece and hope it holds. You move a little farther from the cluster of homes, though their presence lingers behind you like a quiet reassurance. Ahead, the land stretches again, but now it feels different. Not empty, not untouched, but worked. Subtly shaped by hands that return to the same tasks each day again and again until the ground begins to remember them. A narrow path forms beneath your feet, barely visible at first, then clearer as you follow it. It leads toward a small water source, a creek that moves slowly through the land, its surface catching light in soft shifting patterns. The sound reaches you before the sight does. A low, steady murmur, gentle but persistent. You step closer, crouching near the edge. The water is not perfectly clear. It carries fine sediment, giving it a faint cloudiness, but it moves, and that alone gives it value beyond measure out here. You dip your fingers into it. It is cooler than the air, a brief relief against your skin. You notice marks along the bank, repeated footsteps, deep impressions where buckets have been set down and lifted again. The ground here is softer, slightly damp beneath the surface shaped by constant use. An established historical understanding tells us that securing water was one of the most essential and time-consuming tasks for frontier settlers. Without reliable access to clean water, everything else became more difficult. Cooking, cleaning, farming, even basic survival all depended on it. Wells were sometimes dug, but not always successfully. Streams like this, however modest, became lifelines. You straighten, slowly watching as someone approaches along the same path. They carry 2 wooden buckets, one in each hand, their arms held steady despite the weight. Their pace is careful, deliberate. You can see the small adjustments in their posture as they move, compensating for the uneven ground. They reach the creek, set the buckets down, and begin to fill them. The motion is practiced, efficient, no wasted effort. When they lift the buckets again, you can almost feel the strain through the subtle tightening of their shoulders. They turn and begin the walk back toward the homes. You follow? It's at a respectful distance, your steps naturally falling into their rhythm. The path seems longer on the return. Slight inclines that were barely noticeable before now require more attention. The buckets sway slightly with each step, and you understand quietly that this is not a task done once or twice a day. It is repeated, necessary, unavoidable. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some personal accounts. In certain settlements, families would reuse water multiple times before discarding it. First for drinking, then for cooking, then for washing, and finally for cleaning tools or floors. Each use stretched its value a little further, a quiet economy of necessity that shaped daily life. You step aside as the person passes you again, heading toward one of the cabins. They disappear inside and you hear the faint sound of water being poured into a container. A pause, then movement again. You continue walking, your attention shifting to other small activities unfolding nearby. A woman kneels beside a wooden tub scrubbing fabric against a rough surface. The motion is repetitive, steady, the sound of water and cloth creating a soft rhythm that blends with the distant wind. Her hands move with practiced precision, though you can see the slight redness in her fingers, the result of constant contact with water and soap, if soap is available at all. Laundry, you realize, is not a simple task here. It is labor, time-consuming, physical, and never quite finished. The clean clothes hang nearby on a line, stiff in the dry air, moving gently with each passing breeze. A widely accepted observation among historians notes that domestic labour on the frontier required far more time and effort than in later periods, with even simple tasks demanding significant physical energy. There are no shortcuts here, no machines to ease the process, only hands, tools and time. You walk a little further and notice a small cooking area set up just outside one of the homes. Fire burns low, its flames steady and controlled. A pot sits above it, suspended by a simple metal hook. The contents simmer quietly, releasing a faint aroma that reaches you as a mix of something savoury and something indistinct. You take a slow breath, letting the scent settle. It is not strong, not rich in the way you might expect from a modern kitchen. It is subtle, restrained, shaped by limited ingredients and careful use of what is available. A small, somewhat unusual detail from the period suggests that some settlers used whatever edible plants they could find locally to supplement their meals, even experimenting with unfamiliar roots or leaves. Not all of these experiments were successful, some were simply tolerated rather than enjoyed. Still, they added variety, however slight, to an otherwise repetitive diet. You watch as the person tending the pot lifts the lid, briefly checks the contents, then replaces it. The movement is unhurried, almost meditative. Cooking here is not rushed. It unfolds at the pace the fire allows. Nearby, a child carries a smaller bucket, their steps careful but less steady than the adults around them. The water inside sloshes slightly, with each movement threatening to spill. They adjust their grip, concentrating, learning through repetition. There is no formal instruction here, just observation, imitation, and gradual improvement. Scholars continue to discuss how quickly children on the frontier were expected to take on responsibilities, with some suggesting that necessity accelerated maturity, while others believe that elements of play and childhood persisted more than we might assume. Watching the child, now you see both effort and focus, but also a small flicker of something lighter when they manage not to spill a drop. You step toward a patch of ground where tools are laid out. Simple implements, a hoe, its handle worn smooth by use, a bucket with a small crack that has been patched carefully, a knife resting on a flat surface, its blade dulled slightly but still functional. Each object carries signs of repair, nothing is discarded lightly here. If it can be fixed, it is fixed. If it can be used again, it is used again. You reach down and pick up the hoe, feeling its weight. It is heavier than it looks, the balance slightly uneven. You imagine the motion required to use it, the repeated lifting and striking, the slow transformation of hard ground into something that might support crops. You set it back down gently, your hands lingering for a moment on the worn wood. The wind shifts again, carrying a faint coolness that hints at the passing of the day. Shadows begin to stretch slightly longer, though the light remains strong. You notice how everything here follows a rhythm. Not imposed by clocks, but by necessity. Water must be gathered. Clothes must be cleaned. Food must be prepared. Tools must be maintained. Each task connects to the next, forming a chain that stretches across the day. There is little space for idleness, but also a certain steadiness in the repetition. A predictability that in its own quiet way offers a kind of stability. You take another slow breath, letting the air fill your lungs, carrying with it dust smoke and the faint scent of cooking. Your steps slow as you move through the space, careful not to interrupt the flow of activity around you. You are part of it now, even if only as an observer. And as you continue walking, you begin to understand that survival here is not built on single dramatic acts. It's built on small, repeated efforts, done again, and again, and again. You leave the quiet rhythm of chores behind, though it lingers in your mind and your attention shifts toward movement beyond the homes. Out past the last fence post, if it can even be called a fence, the land opens once more, and this time you notice something different in the distance. Not wagons, not scattered settlers, a line that moves with a kind of living weight. Cattle. At first they appear as a slow shifting mass, their shapes blending together in the haze of distance. Then as you walk closer, individual forms begin to separate. Broad backs, heavy heads, tails flicking lazily against flies that seem to exist in endless supply. The sound reaches you in layers, calls uneven and drawn out, hooves pressing into the earth with a dull, steady rhythm. You pause for a moment watching. Along the edges of the herd riders move with a quiet focus. They do not rush, they do not shout unless needed. Their horses step carefully, responding to subtle shifts in weight, small movements of reins and legs. There is a calmness here that feels practiced even in the presence of so many animals that could easily turn unpredictable. You step closer, the ground beneath your boots now marked by countless hoof prints overlapping and deep. The soil is packed, head in places, loose in others, carrying the faint scent of animals and dry grass crushed together. A commonly accepted historical understanding tells us that cattle drives became a central part of the frontier economy in the years after the Civil War, with herds moved across long distances to reach railheads where they could be shipped east. It sounds straightforward when described that way. Out here, standing near the animals, you realize it is anything but simple. One of the riders notices you and gives a small nod, acknowledging your presence without breaking the rhythm of his work. His posture is relaxed but alert, his gaze moving constantly, tracking the edges of the herd, watching for anything that might shift unexpectedly. You take a few careful steps along the side, keeping a respectful distance. The animals are large, and though they move slowly, there is a sense of potential energy in them, as if they could surge forward all at once if given the wrong reason. The rider nearest you adjusts his hat slightly, the brim shading his eyes. His clothing is worn but functional. Dust clings to every surface. His boots, his coat, even the fabric at his shoulders carry the marks of long days spent out here. You notice his saddle, the way it sits securely on the horse, its leather darkened from use. Ropes are coiled, neatly tied in place, but ready to be used at a moment's notice. Everything has a purpose. Nothing is decorative. You walk alongside them for a short distance, your pace matching theirs. The sun presses down steadily, and you feel the heat settling into your shoulders, your back. There is little shade here. The openness that felt expansive earlier now feels exposed. There is a small, less widely known detail about cowboys that rarely makes its way into popular imagination. Many of them were not the solitary figures often portrayed later in stories. A significant number were young men working for wages, some of them recently freed African Americans, others immigrants, all bound by the same demanding work rather than any romantic notion of independence. You glance at the faces around you. They are focused, practical, shaped more by routine than by legend. No one seems interested in posing for a story. A cow near the edge of the herd shifts, suddenly stepping away from the others. The nearest rider reacts almost instantly, guiding his horse forward with a smooth motion. There is no rush, no panic, just a quiet correction. The animal is eased back into place, its movement absorbed by the larger group. You watch the exchange, noting how little noise is involved. Communication here is subtle, a movement of the body, a change in direction. The horse responds, the cattle respond, and balance is restored. Scholars continue to examine how much of the cowboy image was shaped after the fact, particularly through dime novels and later media, compared to the quieter, more methodical reality of the work itself. Standing here with dust rising gently around your boots, and the steady presence of the herd pressing outward, The answer feels less like a mystery and more like a quiet correction. You take a slow breath and the air carries a mix of scents. Dry grass, warm leather, animal musk, and something faintly metallic from the gear. It is not unpleasant, but it is strong-grounded, unavoidable. The sound of the herd settles into a kind of rhythm. Hooves, breathing, occasional low calls. It is not chaotic. It is steady like a slow-moving current that you can feel rather than see. You notice a chuck wagon positioned slightly behind the main group, its wheels half sunk into the earth. A figure moves around it, checking supplies, adjusting something near the back. This, you realize, is where meals are prepared, where tools are stored, where small moments of rest might be found when the work allows. There is an almost unexpected detail tied to these wagons. Some accounts suggest that the cook on a cattle drive often held a position of quiet authority, responsible not just for food, but for maintaining order and routine among the group. It is a reminder that even here in this open and demanding environment, structure still matters. You step a little closer to the wagon, noticing the way items are arranged with care. Pots, utensils, bags of supplies, all placed where they can be reached quickly. Efficiency is not optional here. It is necessary. The rider you noticed earlier passes by again, his horse moving with a smooth, practiced gait. He glances in your direction briefly, then returns his focus to the herd. There is no conversation, no exchange beyond that brief acknowledgement. Words like energy are used carefully. You feel the sun shifting slightly, its angle softening just enough to suggest the slow approach of evening. The light changes the colour of the land, warming it, deepening the tones of the grass and dust. You realise quietly that this is the work behind the image. Not dramatic showdowns or constant action, but long hours of attention, small corrections, steady movement. It is a life built on endurance, on awareness, on the ability to respond without hesitation. You take another step, then another, your pace slowing as you absorb the scene. The herd continues forward. The riders guide it, and you for a moment move alongside them, part of the quiet, unspoken rhythm of the frontier. You remain with the herd as the light begins its slow, almost unnoticeable shift. The brightness softens just enough to take the edge off the heat, and the long shadows stretch quietly across the ground. The cattle continue their steady movement, but there is a subtle change in their energy now. A restlessness faint but present, as if the coming night is already pressing against them. The riders seem to sense it before anything becomes obvious. Their positions adjust slightly, spreading out just a bit more along the edges. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet widening of awareness. You follow along your steps slower now, more deliberate. The ground here is uneven, shaped by hooves and time, and you begin to feel the small strain in your legs that comes from hours of steady movement. There is no place to sit, no clear boundary between work and rest. The land does not provide that unless you make it. As the sun lowers, the colours around you begin to deepen. The grass takes on a warmer tone. The dust in the air catches the light differently, glowing for a moment before settling again. You notice how the horizon, which once felt distant and sharp, now softens into a hazy line that blends sky and land together. A widely accepted historical record explains that cattle drives often lasted for weeks or even months, covering hundreds of miles as herds were moved toward railheads. Nights were not a break from responsibility. They were simply a different kind of work. Someone always had to remain alert. You begin to hear it now, a low, almost constant murmur from the herd. Not loud, not alarming, but present. It moves through the group like a quiet conversation, one that never quite stops. The riders start preparing for the night watch. You notice one of them, dismounting, his movements slow but efficient. He adjusts his saddle, checks the straps, then leads his horse to a slightly higher patch of ground. Another rider takes his place along the edge, filling the space without needing to be told. You watch as a small fire is lit near the chuck wagon. The flames start low, then grow just enough to provide light and a bit of warmth. The smell of smoke drifts outward, mixing with the already familiar sense of dust and animals. There is a subtle detail that appears in some accounts of cattle drives. Cowboys would sometimes sing softly during night watch, not for entertainment, but to soothe the cattle. The sound of a calm human voice could help keep the herd settled, preventing sudden panic that might lead to a dangerous stampede. You listen carefully, and after a moment you hear it. A low voice, steady and unhurried, carrying across the dimming space. The words are not entirely clear, but the tone is gentle, repetitive, almost like a lullaby meant for creatures that outweigh you many times over. You feel something shift in your chest as you listen. The contrast between the size of the herd and the softness of the sound is unexpected, and yet it works. The animals remain calm, their movements slow and contained. Scholars continue to explore how effective these methods truly were, and whether the calming effect came from the sound itself or from the consistent presence of the riders. Standing here, it feels less like a question of science and more like a matter of rhythm. The herd moves, the riders respond, the night settles in around both. You move closer to the fire, the warmth reaching you in a soft wave. It is not strong, but after hours in the open air it feels significant. The person tending it adjusts a pot, the contents shifting slightly as it simmers. You take a seat on a low patch of ground, your legs grateful for the change. The earth is still warm from the day, though the air above it is beginning to cool. You rest your hands against your knees, feeling the slight stiffness that has settled into your muscles. Around you the activity slows but does not stop. Riders rotate positions, some resting briefly while others take their place. The herd continues its quiet movement, the sound of hooves and breathing forming a constant backdrop. You look up at the sky. It is changing now, the bright blue fading into deeper shades, the first faint hints of stars beginning to appear. Out here, away from any concentrated light, the sky feels larger, closer somehow, more present. There is a small, almost overlooked detail tied to these long nights. Some cowboys reportedly developed an acute awareness of the sky, using stars not just for navigation, but as a way to mark the passing of time. Without clocks or clear schedules, the movement of the stars became a kind of silent guide. You find yourself watching them now, noticing how they emerge slowly one by one, until the sky begins to fill with points of light. The temperature drops further and you pull your coat closer around you. The warmth from the fire reaches only so far. Beyond that, the air carries a sharpness that was not there during the day. You listen again to the singing. It continues unbroken, weaving through the sounds of the herd and the quiet movements of the riders. It is not meant to be impressive. It is meant to be steady. You feel your breathing begin to match its slowing deepening. The land around you feels different at night. The vastness remains, but it softens, edges blurring into shadow. The horizon disappears, replaced by darkness that stretches outward in all directions. You shift slightly, adjusting your position, and notice how the ground feels firmer now, the warmth fading as the night settles in. A rider passes near you, his footsteps quiet, his presence steady. He glances in your direction. A brief acknowledgement, then continues on. There is a shared understanding here, even without words. Everyone has a role. Everyone contributes to the balance that keeps things from slipping into chaos. You take another slow breath, the air cool in your lungs. The herd remains calm. The fire burns low. The voices stay soft. And you sitting there at the edge of it all, begin to feel the weight of the day easing, slightly replaced by a quieter awareness. Out here, night is not an end. It is simply another part of the work. You rise slowly from the ground, your legs stiff at first, then easing as you shift your weight. The fire behind you burns lower. Now its glow steady but subdued, and the quiet singing has softened into something almost indistinguishable from the night itself. The herd remains calm, spread across the darkened plain, their presence felt more than clearly seen. You step away from the circle of light, moving toward where a few horses stand tethered. Loosely, their silhouettes outlined faintly against the sky. They shift as you approach, not startled but aware. One of them lifts its head, slightly ears, turning in your direction, measuring you in a calm, practiced way. You pause beside it, letting your hand hover for a moment before resting gently against its neck. The warmth of the animal surprises you. After the cooling air, it feels steady, alive, grounding. Its coat is rough beneath your fingers, carrying dust and the faint scent of sweat and leather. A well-established historical insight points out that horses were not simply tools on the frontier. They were essential partners in nearly every form of movement and labour, especially for cowboys whose daily tasks depended entirely on their ability to ride, guide, and respond quickly. Without a reliable horse, the work could not continue. You notice the saddle more closely now. The leather is worn smooth in places darkened by years of use. The stitching is visible, some sections reinforced, others showing signs of repair. Nothing about it is decorative. Every piece serves a purpose shaped by experience rather than style. You run your fingers lightly along the edge of the saddle horn, imagining the countless times it has been gripped, braced against, relied upon. There is a quiet history in objects like this one that does not need to be written down to be understood. Nearby, another rider adjusts a coil of rope, his hands moving with a kind of absent-minded precision. He does not look at it directly, yet every loop falls into place exactly as it should. You realize that this is not something learned quickly. It is built over time through repetition, through small corrections made again and again. There is an interesting lesser-known observation recorded in some accounts. Skilled riders could often communicate with their horses using minimal cues, sometimes guiding them almost entirely through shifts in balance rather than visible movements. To an outsider, it might appear as though the horse is acting on its own. In reality, it is responding to signals so subtle they are nearly invisible. You take a step back and watch as one of the riders mounts his horse. The movement is smooth, almost effortless. A brief shift of weight, a controlled lift, and he settles into place as if he's always been there. The horse responds with a slight adjustment, accepting the added weight without hesitation. They move off, slowly circling the outer edge of the herd. There is no rush, no dramatic gesture, just a steady presence maintaining the balance that has been carefully established. You walk alongside the tethered horses for a short distance, noticing the differences between them. Some stand quietly, barely moving. Others shift their weight more often, their tails flicking their heads, turning slightly as they track sounds in the distance. Each one has its own rhythm, its own way of being in this space. Scholars continue to examine how much of the rider's identity was tied to the horse and whether the bond between them was purely practical or something more complex. Observing them now, it feels difficult to separate the two. The rider guides, but the horse carries. The horse responds, but the rider depends. It is not a simple relationship. You glance down at the gear laid out nearby. Boots worn and shaped by long use, spurs small but carefully crafted, their edges dulled from contact. A hat resting on a low surface, its brim slightly bent, its form adjusted over the time to fit the person who wears it. There is a subtle detail that often goes unnoticed. Many of these items were not issued or standardized. They were chosen, adapted, repaired, and personalized over time. A saddle might be adjusted to fit both horse and rider. Boots might be resoled repeatedly rather than replaced. Each piece becomes a reflection of the person who uses it. You pick up one of the ropes, feeling its texture against your hands. It is rough, sturdy, slightly stiff in places where it has been exposed to the elements. You try to form a loop imitating what you saw earlier, but it does not fall into place as easily. The rope resists its shape, unfamiliar to your hands. You release it gently, letting it settle back into its coiled form. The night deepens around you, the sky now filled with stars that seem brighter than before. The fire behind you flickers softly, its light reaching only a short distance before fading into darkness. You take a slow breath, the cool air filling your lungs, carrying with it the faint sense of leather dust and distant smoke. It feels now, clearer in a way that matches the stillness around you. A rider passes again, this time closer, his horse moving with a quiet confidence. You notice the way his posture shifts slightly with each step, adjusting, balancing, maintaining a connection that does not need to be spoken. You find yourself wondering briefly how long it takes to learn that kind of ease. Not just the physical skill, but the awareness. The ability to read the land, the animals, the subtle changes that signal when something is about to shift. You stand there for a moment, letting the question settle without needing an answer. The herd remains steady. The riders continue their quiet circuit. The horses wait patient ready. And you standing among them begin to understand that this life is built not on grand gestures but on small, consistent actions. The way a rope is coiled, the way a saddle is secured, the way a horse is guided with the lightest touch. You take a final look at the scene, letting the details fix themselves in your mind. Then you turn slightly, your steps slow and measured, as you move back toward the dim glow of the fire and the steady rhythm that carries through the night. You return toward the soft circle of firelight, and as you do, the quiet order of the camp settles around you again. The herd remains steady in the distance, a low presence in the dark, while the riders continue their slow rotations. Nothing feels hurried. Everything feels sustained. Near the fire, a few figures sit or stand in small practical positions, their movements unspoken but coordinated. You notice more clearly now that not all of them are dressed the same. The differences are subtle at first. A variation in fabric, a different way of tying a scarf, a skirt instead of trousers, but the roles here are not as neatly divided as you might expect. A woman kneels near the fire, adjusting the position of a pot with a steady hand. The light flickers across her face, revealing lines shaped not by age alone, but by repetition. Her movements are precise, efficient, without wasted effort. She lifts the lid briefly, checks the contents, then replaces it, adjusting the hook slightly to control the heat. You stand quietly nearby, watching. A reliable historical account highlights that women on the frontier often carried a wide range of responsibilities that extended far beyond domestic work, managing homes, assisting with labor, raising children, and sometimes running businesses or farms in the absence of men. The division of labor existed, but it was flexible when survival demanded it. The woman shifts slightly and then rises to her feet, wiping her hands on a piece of cloth tucked at her side. She glances toward the herd, then toward a nearby structure, her attention moving fluidly between tasks. There is no pause where she seems to consider what to do next. It is already known. You follow her gaze and notice a smaller figure near the edge of the light. A child wrapped in a simple layer of fabric sitting close to the ground. They are watching the fire, their eyes reflecting the flicker of the flames. Their posture is relaxed, but there is an alertness there, a quiet awareness of everything happening around them. You take a slow step closer, careful not to disturb the moment. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some frontier diaries. Women often adapted their clothing to suit both practical work and harsh conditions, modifying garments for durability and function rather than appearance. Layers were adjusted, fabrics reinforced, and items reused until they could no longer hold together. You glance again at the woman near the fire. Her clothing shows signs of this. Patches in places where fabric has worn thin. Reinforced seams where stress would be greatest. Nothing here is accidental. Every change has a reason. She moves toward a nearby bundle, lifting it with a practiced motion. Inside you notice tools, simple necessary items. A knife, a piece of cloth, something that might be used for stitching. She checks them quickly, then sets them down again within easy reach. Scholars continue to examine how much of the frontier's survival depended on the adaptability of women in these environments, with some suggesting that their contributions were often underrepresented in later narratives. Observing the scene now, it becomes clear that without this steady, continuous effort, much of what you have seen would not hold together. You shift your attention to another part of the camp. A second woman stands near a small structure, speaking quietly with someone just inside. Her voice is low, calm, carrying a tone that feels both reassuring and firm. You cannot hear the exact words, but the cadence suggests familiarity, routine. A child passes between them, carrying a small object with both hands moving carefully as if aware of its importance. The adults watch but do not intervene. Trust is given early here, shaped by necessity. You step slightly closer to the fire, feeling its warmth again against your skin. The contrast between heat and the cool night air is more noticeable now. Your hands instinctively move toward it, fingers spreading slightly to catch the warmth. There is a subtle, almost overlooked aspect of frontier life. Emotional labor, though rarely named as such, played a role in maintaining stability. Comfort, reassurance, the quiet management of fear or uncertainty, all of these were part of daily survival, even if they left no physical trace. You watch as the woman near the fire glances once more toward the herd, then back to the camp. Her movements slow slightly just for a moment before she resumes her steady pace. It is not fatigue exactly, more like a brief pause to take in the whole of what surrounds her. You realize that the work here is not only physical, it is continuous awareness. You take a slow breath, letting the air settle in your chest. The scents are familiar now. Smoke earth, fabric, faint traces of food. They blend together into something that feels grounded, stable in its own way. A rider approaches the edge of the firelight, dismounting with a quiet motion. He nods toward the woman, a small gesture of acknowledgement. She returns it without breaking her rhythm. No words are exchanged, but the meaning is clear. Tasks are being completed. Roles are being fulfilled. You notice how the child has shifted closer to the fire, their posture relaxing slightly. The warmth reaches them more fully now, softening the edges of the night. There is no grand moment here, no dramatic shift, just a series of small actions carried out with care, building something that holds, at least for now. You step back slightly, giving space to the quiet balance that has formed. The fire continues to burn low. The herd remains steady, the riders move in slow practice patterns, and the women, you realize, hold a different kind of center here. Not loud, not always visible, but constant. The kind of presence that keeps everything from unraveling when the conditions grow harder. You lift your gaze briefly to the sky, the stars steady above you, then lower it again to the fire. The night continues, the work continues, and you standing at the edge of it all begin to see how much of this world rests on quiet strength. You let the warmth of the fire linger on your hands a moment longer, then step away, your eyes adjusting again to the softer darkness beyond its reach. The camp continues behind you in its steady rhythm, but your attention drifts toward a quieter space nearby where the sounds feel lighter, less weighted by responsibility. You notice them before you fully see them. Small movements, a quick step, a low laugh that rises and fades just as quickly. Children. They gather near the edge of the camp, close enough to remain within sight, but far enough to claim a space that feels like their own. The ground here is worn, but not as heavily as near the water or the cooking area. Their footprints are lighter, scattered in patterns that suggest play more than labor. You move closer, your steps slow, careful not to interrupt. One child crouches near the ground, tracing shapes into the dust with a small stick. The lines are simple at first, then more elaborate, forming something that might be a house, or perhaps just a pattern that makes sense only to them. Another stands nearby, watching, then adds a line of their own, altering the shape without hesitation. A commonly accepted historical perspective suggests that children on the frontier were often expected to take on responsibilities at a younger age than in more settled regions, assisting with chores and contributing to the household in practical ways. And yet moments like this remind you that childhood does not disappear entirely. It shifts, adapts, finds space where it can. You kneel slightly, observing the drawing. The dust moves easily under the stick, the surface dry and responsive. A small breeze passes, softening the edges of the lines, erasing parts of the image almost as soon as it's made. The child does not seem bothered. They simply begin again. There is a curious detail mentioned in some personal recollections. Children on the frontier often created their own games, using whatever materials were available, stone sticks, scraps of fabric. Toys as you might think of them were rare. Imagination filled the space where objects could not. You watch as another child picks up a smooth stone and tosses it lightly from hand to hand, testing its weight. A second child joins in, and soon they are passing it back and forth, their movements growing more confident with each attempt. The game has no formal rules, yet it continues, shaped by the moment. You shift your weight slightly, the ground firm beneath you, and notice how the children move differently from the adults. Their steps are quicker, less measured. They adjust without thinking, their passades more fluid, their energy less contained. A small voice rises briefly, calling out something you cannot quite catch. Another responds. The exchange is short, but filled with a kind of ease that contrasts with the quiet focus of the adults. Researchers have long examined how frontier conditions influence childhood development, with some suggesting that the blending of work and play created a unique environment where practical skills were learned almost unconsciously. Watching now, it feels less like a theory and more like a quiet truth unfolding in front of you. One child stands and begins to walk toward a nearby structure carrying a small bundle. Their steps are careful, more deliberate now, as if shifting from play to responsibility. They disappear briefly inside, then return without the bundle, their posture relaxing again as they rejoin the others. You notice how easily they move between roles. There is no clear boundary, no formal transition, just a continuous flow from one task to the next. You take a slow breath, the air cool and steady, carrying the faint sense of smoke and earth. The sounds of the herd reach you again, distant but constant, a reminder that the larger world continues its rhythm beyond this small circle. A child near you looks up briefly, their eyes meeting yours for a moment. There is no hesitation, no fear. Just a simple acknowledgement, then their attention returns to the game. You feel something soften slightly in your chest. There is resilience here, but also something lighter. A quiet ability to find moments of ease within a life that demands so much. You shift your gaze toward the horizon, though it is now only a suggestion in the darkness. The land stretches outward unseen but still present, holding the same challenges it did during the day. And yet here in this small pocket of movement and quiet laughter, the weight feels different. You notice another small detail. One of the children hums softly, almost without realizing it. The sound blends with the distant singing of the riders, creating a layered rhythm that feels both separate and connected. You listen for a moment, letting the sound settle. The humming fades, replaced by a quiet exchange of words, then by the soft scuff of feet against the ground. You realize that these moments, though brief, carry a kind of balance. They do not remove the difficulty of life here, but they soften its edges just enough to make it bearable. You stand slowly, your legs steady now, and take a step back, giving the children space to continue without your presence pressing too close. The firelight flickers behind you. The herd moves in the distance. The riders maintain their quiet watch, and the children in their small corner of the frontier continue to shape their own world, one simple movement at a time. You turn slightly, your steps measured, as you begin to move again, carrying with you the image of dust drawings, shared stones and soft laughter that rise and beats into the night. Out here, even in a place shaped by necessity, something gentle remains, and it finds its way into the smallest spaces. You leave the soft murmur of children behind and walk toward a sturdier structure near the edge of town. It stands a little apart from the others, its walls thicker, its door reinforced with iron hinges that catch the faint glow of lantern light. The ground here is more worn, the path leading to it marked by deeper, more frequent footsteps. A jail. You pause outside listening. The sounds here are different from the rest of the settlement. Quieter, but not in the same restful way. There is tension in the stillness, a sense that voices have been lowered rather than absent. You hear a faint scrape from inside, the shifting of weight, someone moving in a confined space. A lantern hangs near the entrance, its flame steady, casting a warm but limited light. It does not push back the darkness very far. It simply defines a small area where things can be seen clearly while everything beyond it remains uncertain. A broadly accepted historical account explains that law enforcement in frontier towns was often limited in both manpower and resources. Sheriffs and marshals operated with authority, but not always with the support systems that might exist in more established regions. Maintaining order was less about constant control and more about responding when needed. The door opens with a firm motion, and a man steps out, adjusting his coat slightly as he does. A badge catches the light briefly on his chest, not polished, not decorative, functional. He pauses for a moment, scanning the area, his gaze moving slowly, taking in the surroundings. When his eyes pass over you, there is no surprise, just a brief acknowledgement then, a return to his quiet observation of the space. You notice the way he stands, balanced, not rigid but ready. His posture suggests a kind of awareness that does not switch off even in moments of relative calm. Inside you hear another sound, a low voice. It is not raised in anger, it carries a steady tone measured controlled. You cannot make out the words, but the cadence suggests a conversation that is not entirely comfortable. You take a small step closer to the doorway, careful not to intrude. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some local races Frontier jails were often simple structures, sometimes consisting of little more than a single room with bars or reinforced walls. Conditions varied widely, and security depended as much on vigilance as on physical barriers. You glance at the walls again, noting the thickness of the wood, the way it has been layered and secured. It feels strong, but you cannot help noticing the small imperfections. A gap here, a slight shift there. It is solid, but not invulnerable. The man with the badge steps aside slightly, giving you a clearer view inside without inviting you in. You see a narrow space, dimly lit with a single figure seated against the far wall. Their posture is still, their face partially obscured by shadow. There is no dramatic scene unfolding, no raised voices or sudden movements, just a quiet containment. You feel a subtle tension in your chest, a response to the space rather than to any specific action. The knowledge that this is where things come when they go wrong. Research into frontier justice suggests that enforcement of law could vary significantly depending on location, with some areas maintaining a relatively stable order, while others experienced more frequent conflict. The presence of a jail, even a simple one, was often seen as a step toward establishing that order. You shift your gaze back to the man standing outside. His expression remains neutral, but there is a weight behind it. Responsibility, perhaps, or simply the awareness that his role requires him to stand between order and whatever might challenge it. A faint breeze passes through, stirring the edge of his coat. He does not react to it. You notice another small detail. A set of keys hangs at his side, attached to a simple ring. They move slightly with each shift of his weight, producing a soft metallic sound that carries in the quiet air. It is a subtle reminder of control, of access, of the ability to open and close to allow movement or prevent it. Some accounts mention that lawmen on the frontier often had to rely on reputation as much as enforcement, their authority strengthened by how they were perceived by the community. A calm presence, a steady demeanour could be as important as any physical measure. You watch as another figure approaches, walking up the path with a measured pace. They exchange a few quiet words with the man at the door. The conversation is brief, practical. No gestures, no visible emotion, just information passing from one to the other. The second figure nods, then turns away, disappearing back into the dim outlines of the town. You take a slow breath, the air cool and still around you. The jail stands as a quiet anchor in this place, a reminder that even in a land defined by openness, there are boundaries. Lines that are drawn, sometimes clearly, sometimes not. You step back slightly, giving the space a wider view. The lantern continues to burn. The man remains at his post. Inside, the figure sits in silence. And beyond all of it, the frontier stretches outward, vast and indifferent, holding both order and uncertainty within its reach. You turn gently, your steps slow as you move away from the building, carrying with you the sense of balance that must be maintained here, not through force alone, but through presence, through watchfulness, through the quiet, steady effort to keep things from slipping too far out of place. You leave the quiet weight of the jail behind you, though it lingers in your thoughts as you move along the edge of the settlement. The ground here is less worn, the path less defined, and the light from the lanterns fades more quickly into darkness. It feels like a place where things are less observed, less contained. You walk slowly, your senses adjusting again to the softer, less structured space. The sounds of the town fall behind you, replaced by the distant murmur of the herd and the occasional shift of wind across the land. Ahead, near a cluster of low structures and tethered horses, you notice a small group gathered in conversation. Their posture is different from what you've seen so far, less open, more contained. Voices kept low, movements deliberate. You pause at a distance, watching. There is no immediate sign of trouble, no raised voices or visible conflict. And yet there is something in the way they stand, in the way they look at one another, that suggests a different kind of presence. Not law, something that exists alongside it. A well-documented historical pattern shows that not all individuals on the frontier followed the same path of settlement and labour. Some turned to theft, robbery, or other forms of survival that existed outside formal structures of law. The reasons varied. Opportunity, desperation, circumstance. The result, however, often placed them in a different category within these communities. You take a slow step closer, careful not to draw attention. One of the men shifts slightly, adjusting something at his side. The movement is small, but it reveals the outline of a weapon. Not displayed openly, but not entirely hidden either. It rests there as part of his presence, as natural to him as the rope or saddle you saw earlier with the riders. Another figure leans against a post, arms crossed loosely, their gaze moving across the area with a kind of quiet calculation. They are not watching anything specific, they are watching everything. There is a lesser-known detail mentioned in some accounts. Not all outlaws were constant fugitives moving from place to place. Some lived within or near settlements, blending into daily life, their actions only becoming visible when opportunity or necessity called for it. You feel a slight shift in your awareness as you observe them. A recognition that this space operates by different rules, even if those rules are not spoken aloud. The conversation continues low and measured. You catch fragments of words, but not enough to form a clear picture. It does not feel like a casual exchange. There is purpose behind it, even if it remains hidden. You glance briefly at the surrounding area. A horse stands nearby, its reins loosely tied, its posture relaxed but attentive. Another shifts its weight, its tail flicking slowly. The animals seem calm, unaffected by the tension you sense among the people. You take another step, then stop, choosing not to move any closer. Research into frontier life suggests that the line between lawful and unlawful behavior was not always sharply defined, particularly in regions where formal enforcement was limited. Some individuals moved between roles, their actions shaped by changing circumstances rather than fixed identities. You watch as one of the men reaches into his coat and removes a small object, passing it to another. The exchange is quick, almost casual, but there is a precision to it that suggests intention. The object disappears just as quickly as it appeared. No one reacts outwardly. No one draws attention. The moment passes, absorbed into the quiet flow of the night. There is a subtle detail that surfaces in some personal recollections. Reputation on the frontier could carry as much weight as action. A person known for certain behavior might find doors closed to them, or open in ways that others would not expect. Trust and suspicion existed side by side, shifting depending on context. You feel the air move again, cooler now, brushing against your face. It carries the faint scent of smoke from the camp, grounding you slightly as you stand at the edge of this quieter, more uncertain space. One of the figures glances in your direction. The look is brief but direct. You hold still, meeting it for just a moment before lowering your gaze slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. There is no challenge here, no invitation, just awareness. The figure looks away, returning to the conversation. You release a slow breath you did not realize you were holding. Scholars continue to discuss how much of the outlaw image was shaped by later storytelling, and how much reflected the lived reality of those who existed on the margins of frontier society. Standing here, the truth feels less dramatic than the stories, but no less complex. These are not caricatures. They are people navigating a landscape that offers limited choices. You take a step back then, another, increasing the distance between yourself and the group. The tension eases slightly as you move away, replaced by the more familiar sounds of the camp and the distant herd. The ground beneath your feet feels firmer, gain the path more defined as you return toward the central space. You glance once more over your shoulder. The figures remain where they are, their forms partially obscured by shadow, their conversation continuing in low tones. Nothing has changed outwardly, and yet you carry with you a new understanding, that the frontier holds many layers, some visible, some not. You turn fully now, your steps steady, as you move back toward the faint glow of firelight and the quieter rhythms that have begun to feel familiar. Behind you the shadows remain. Ahead the camp continues its slow, steady motion. And between the two you walk carefully, aware now of the balance that must be maintained in a place where not everything is as it first appears. You move back toward the center of the settlement, where the light grows warmer again, and the sounds gather into something more social, more shared. The tension you felt at the edge fades, replaced by a different kind of energy. Not restful exactly, but looser, less guarded. Ahead the saloon doors sway gently, pushed by a mix of wind and passing bodies. Light spills out in uneven bands across the ground, cutting through the darker tones of the night. You pause just outside for a moment, listening. Music slightly uneven but lively, laughter rising and falling, the steady murmur of many voices layered together. You step forward and push the door open, the wood giving way with a soft resistance before swinging inward. The shift in atmosphere is immediate, the air is warmer here, heavier. It carries the smell of smoke, of spilled drink, of worn wood, and too many people sharing the same space. A broadly recognised historical observation notes that saloons served as central gathering places in many frontier towns, offering not just drinks but social interaction, news, and a place to escape the isolation of daily labour. Standing here, you feel that purpose clearly. You take a few slow steps inside your boot, sounding differently against the wooden floor. The boards creak softly, each movement adding to the layered soundscape around you. At a table near the centre, a group leans in close, cards spread between them. Their hands move with quiet precision, placing, lifting, adjusting. Coins sit in small stacks, their dull shine catching the light. No one speaks loudly. The focus is contained attention fixed on the game. Nearby, someone strums a stringed instrument, the notes slightly off but steady enough to carry a tune. Another taps a rhythm against the table, adding to the music without fully joining it. The result is imperfect but alive. You move along the edge of the room, observing. There is a subtle detail that appears in some accounts of these places. Not all saloons were purely chaotic or reckless. Many operated with an unspoken structure where regulars knew their place, understood the tone of the room, and adjusted their behaviour accordingly. Disorder existed, but it was not constant. You notice the bar itself worn smooth along the top where countless hands have rested. Behind it, shelves hold bottles of varying shapes and sizes, their contents catching the light in muted tones. A figure moves there, pouring, wiping, adjusting their motions, steady and practiced. A cup is set down with a soft, deliberate motion. A nod is exchanged. No words are needed. You step closer, resting your hand lightly against the edge of the bar. The wood feels solid, slightly warm from the contact of others before you. There is a faint stickiness in places, the result of spilled liquid that has been wiped but not entirely removed. A lesser-known observation from personal journals suggests that some frontier saloons also functioned as informal post offices or message centres where news and information were exchanged as freely as drinks. Conversations carried more than entertainment. They carried updates, warnings, opportunities. You listen more closely now. Fragments of speech drift toward you. Mentions of weather, of distances, of prices, of places that feel both near and impossibly far at the same time. One voice rises slightly, telling a story. The tone shifts as it unfolds, drawing in those nearby. There is a moment of emphasis, a pause, then a quiet ripple of amusement from those listening. The details may not all be accurate, but that does not seem to matter. The story holds. You find yourself drawn to the sound not because of what is being said, but because of how it is shared. A moment of connection, brief but real. Scholars continue to explore how storytelling shaped community life on the frontier, particularly in spaces like this where people gathered after long days of work. Stories help define identity, preserve memory, and create a sense of belonging in places that were still forming. You take a slow breath, the air thick but not unpleasant once you adjust. The warmth settles around you, contrasting with the cool night outside. At another table, a game ends, coins are gathered, some shifting hands, others remaining where they are. There is no outburst, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet acknowledgement of the result. A chair scrapes softly against the floor as someone stands, stretching slightly before moving toward the door. The movement creates a brief opening in the flow of the room, then closes again as others shift to fill the space. You notice how the light plays across the room, catching faces, then leaving them in the shadow. It creates a rhythm of visibility where no one is fully seen all the time. There is a small, almost overlooked detail. Some saloons employed musicians not for performance alone, but to maintain a certain atmosphere, to keep the energy of the room balanced. The music did not need to be perfect. It needed to be present. You listen again to the instrument, the steady, imperfect melody weaving through the voices. You feel your shoulders relax slightly, the tension from earlier easing in this more contained environment. Not gone, but softened. You glance toward the door where the outside darkness waits just beyond the light. The contrast feels sharper now, the boundary between inside and outside more defined. You take another moment, letting the sound settle into you. The cards, the music, the low hum of conversation, each one a thread in the fabric of this place. Then slowly you turn your hand, leaving the bar as you make your way back toward the door. The wood creaks again beneath your steps, familiar now. You push the door open, and the cooler night air meets you once more, clearing the heaviness from your senses. Behind you, the saloon continues its quiet life. Ahead, the frontier stretches outward, and you step back into it, carrying with you the warmth, the noise, and the brief sense of shared presence that exists within those wooden walls. You step away from the lingering warmth of the saloon, and the night air greets you with a softer, cooler presence. The sounds behind you fade, gradually replaced by something quieter, more reflective. The settlement does not sleep entirely, but parts of it begin to settle into a different rhythm. You follow the narrow path that leads slightly beyond the cluster of homes, where the ground feels less worn and the light grows thinner. A lantern hangs at a distance, its glow dim and steady, marking a place that does not draw attention in the same way as the saloon or the fire. As you approach, you begin to understand why. A small gathering stands in silence. Not many people, just a few figures, their posture still their presence, focused on something in front of them. You slow your steps instinctively, lowering your gaze as you come closer. A simple wooden marker rises from the ground. No elaborate carving, no polished surface, just a name roughly shaped into the wood, and a set of dates that feel shorter than they should be. A grounded historical perspective reveals that mortality rates on the frontier were significantly higher than in more established areas due to disease accidents, limited medical care, and the harshness of the environment itself. It is not a dramatic fact, it is a quiet one carried in places like this. You stand at a respectful distance, the air around you still almost heavy in its calm. One of the figures shifts slightly, their hands clasped in front of them. Another bows, their head, eyes closed, lips moving in a silent rhythm. The words are not spoken aloud, but the intention is clear. Prayer. You take a slow breath, the cool air settling gently in your chest. The scent here is different. Less smoke, less dust, more earth, freshly turned soil, faintly damp beneath the surface. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some frontier accounts. In the absence of formal clergy, community members often took turns leading simple services or prayers, shaping rituals from memory or necessity rather than strict tradition. Faith here was not always structured, but it was present. You listen as a quiet voice begins to speak, soft but steady. The words are simple, not ornate, not formal. They carry a tone of familiarity as if spoken many times before, even if not in this exact place. You do not catch every word, but you understand enough. Remembrance, hope, a kind of acceptance. You shift your weight slightly, the ground firm beneath your boots. The stillness invites you to slow even further, to let your thoughts stretch out without urgency. Nearby, another marker stands, then another. Not arranged in perfect lines, but placed with care. Each one represents a story that has already ended, though the details are not all visible here. Academic discussions often explore how frontier communities coped with loss, particularly in environments where danger was constant and resources were limited. Some suggest that rituals like these provided a necessary sense of continuity, a way to hold on to meaning even when circumstances felt uncertain. You look at the names again, the rough letters carved into the wood. They are not perfect, some lines are uneven, some shapes slightly off. But they are deliberate. Someone took the time to mark this place to ensure that it would not be forgotten entirely. A breeze moves gently across the ground, brushing past the markers, stirring the edges of clothing. It carries a faint chill, reminding you that the night is deepening. One of the figures kneels briefly, placing a small object at the base of the marker. You cannot see it clearly, but the gesture itself feels significant. A token, a memory-given form. There is a subtle, often overlooked aspect of frontier life. Mourning was not always expressed through grand displays, but through small personal acts. A moment of silence, a simple offering, a return to the same place again and again. You feel a quiet stillness settle around you, not heavy nor overwhelming, but present. The voice speaking fades and the group remains in silence for a moment longer. No one rushes to leave. No one breaks the space too quickly. Then slowly, one by one, they begin to step back. A nod here, a gentle touch on a shoulder, small gestures that carry more meaning than words. You step back as well, giving space as the gathering disperses. The lantern continues to burn its light steady, marking the place even as the people move away. You take one last look at the markers, their shape simple against the dark ground. Then you turn your steps slow as you make your way back toward the faint glow of the settlement. The sounds begin to return gradually. A distant voice, the soft creak of wood, the low murmur of the herd. Life continues. It does not pause for long, but places like this remain quiet and steady, holding the memory of what has been. You walk carefully, your attention still shaped by the stillness you have just left behind. And as you move, you carry with you a deeper understanding of the balance here. Between effort and loss, between presence and absence, between the living and the memory of those who came before. You walk back towards the main path, the quiet of the burial ground still resting gently in your thoughts. The settlement feels different now, not louder or busier, but layered. Each place you have passed carries something of its own, and now they begin to connect. As you move forward, you notice a new sound entering the familiar rhythm. A distant rhythmic vibration that feels different from hooves or footsteps. It hums faintly through the ground, steady and mechanical. You pause listening. It comes again, low persistent, almost like a heartbeat that does not belong to the land itself. You follow the direction of the sound, your steps slow and attentive. The path leads you slightly away from the central cluster of homes toward a stretch of open ground that has been cleared more deliberately. The grass is thinner here, the soil more exposed, as if something has been cut through it with intention. Then you see it. A line, not a natural feature but something placed. Wooden ties set into the earth, evenly spaced, supporting two long strips of metal that stretch into the distance. They run straight, fast, straighter than anything else you've seen here, cutting across the land without hesitation. Railroad tracks, tracks. A widely accepted historical interpretation explains that the expansion of railroads in the late 19th century transformed the American frontier, connecting distant regions, enabling faster movement of goods and people, and reshaping the pace of life itself. Standing here, you feel that shift in a way that words alone cannot fully capture. You step closer, your boot pressing against the packed earth beside the track. The metal rails catch the faint light, their surfaces smooth worn by repeated use. You reach out and touch one lightly. It holds a lingering warmth, though the air around it has cooled. The vibration comes again, stronger now. You lift your gaze toward the horizon, following the line of the track as it disappears into darkness. Somewhere out there, something is moving toward you. There is a lesser-known detail noted in some accounts. Early trains on the frontier were not always frequent or predictable, and their arrival could be both anticipated and disruptive, bringing supplies, news, and new faces, but also altering the balance of places that had grown used to isolation. You stand still listening as the sound grows gradually louder. It is not sudden. It builds layer by layer until it becomes unmistakable. A train approaches. The air seems to shift slightly, carrying the faint scent of coal smoke ahead of the machine itself. It reaches you before the train is visible, a thin trace that grows stronger with each passing moment. You feel the ground beneath your feet respond to subtle trembling that increases as the distance closes. Scholarly discussions often examine how the arrival of railroads impacted frontier communities, with some suggesting that it brought opportunity and connection, while others argue that it disrupted existing ways of life, introducing new pressures and changes that were not always welcomed. Watching now, you sense both possibilities at once. A light appears in the distance, small at first, then growing steadily brighter. It moves along the track with a determined forward motion, unbroken, unwavering. You step back slightly, giving the track a wider berth. The sound intensifies, the steady rhythm of metal against metal rising into a layered roar that fills the space. It contrasts sharply with the quiet patterns you have grown used to. This is not a natural rhythm. It is imposed, directed. The train comes into view, its form emerging from the darkness. a large, powerful presence moving with a kind of controlled force that feels almost out of place against the open land. You watch as it passes, each car following the last in a long, continuous line. The wheels strike the rails with a repeating pattern, a steady cadence that seems to echo through your chest. There is a small, often overlooked detail tied to these moments. For many frontier towns, the arrival of a train was not just a logistical event, but a social one. People would gather to watch, to receive goods, to send letters, to catch glimpses of places beyond their immediate surroundings. You glance towards the settlement behind you and notice figures beginning to move in this direction, drawn by the sound, by the light, by the promise of connection. The train slows slightly as it approaches a designated point along the track. Not a full station, but a place prepared for its arrival. A platform of sorts, simple but functional. You move closer, joining the small gathering. Voices rise slightly, still controlled, but carrying a note of anticipation. A crate is lifted. A door opens. A figure steps down from one of the cars, their posture adjusting as their feet meet the ground. The exchange begins. Goods are passed. Words are shared. Information moves quickly, quietly, efficiently. You stand at the edge of it, observing. This is something new within the rhythm you've been following. Faster, more connected, less dependent on the slow movement of people and animals across long distances. And yet it does not replace what you have seen. It adds to it. The train remains for a short time, then prepares to move again. The sound shifts, building once more as it gathers momentum. The light recedes, the vibration fades, and gradually the land returns to its quieter state. The track remains, a line drawn across the frontier. You take a slow breath, the air now carrying the lingering scent of smoke mixed with the familiar dryness of the plains. Behind you, the settlement resumes its steady rhythm. Ahead, the track stretches into darkness, and you stand between them, aware that something has changed, even if the full shape of that change is not yet clear. You turn slowly, your steps measured, as you begin to walk back, carrying with you the echo of metal, the glow of distant light, and the quiet understanding that the frontier is not as isolated as it once was. You leave the fading echo of the train behind, though its presence lingers in the air like a memory that has not quite settled. The track stretches away into darkness, a quiet reminder that the frontier is connected to something larger, whether it welcomes that connection or not. You walk beyond the edge of the settlement again, your steps slower now, guided more by instinct than by any visible path. The ground changes subtly beneath your boots. The soil feels less worn here, the grass slightly taller, the signs of constant human movement less apparent. The night is deeper now. The sounds of the camp fall behind you, replaced by the steady whisper of wind moving across open land. It carries a cooler edge brushing against your face, slipping through your coat in a way that feels both gentle and persistent. Ahead, the land seems empty, and yet it does not feel unoccupied. You pause, your attention sharpening slightly, not out of fear but out of awareness. There is a presence here that does not announce itself in the same way as the settlement or the herd. It exists quietly within the land rather than upon it. A grounded historical understanding reminds us that long before settlers arrived, these lands were home to diverse indigenous nations, each with their own systems of knowledge movement and relationship to the environment. The frontier as you're experiencing it is not an untouched space. It is a place of overlapping lives and histories. You take a slow step forward, your gaze adjusting to the darker shapes around you. Then you see it, not a structure in the same sense as the cabins or the town, but something more integrated with the land. A small grouping of forms, low and deliberate, arranged with care rather than haste. You approach slowly, your movements calm, your presence quiet. A fire burns low at the centre, its light softer than the one in the settlement, less insistent. Around it figures sit or stand, their outlines steady, their posture composed. There is no rush here, no scattered movement. Everything feels intentional. You stop at a respectful distance, not stepping into the space without invitation. One of the figures turns slightly, their gaze meeting yours. There is no surprise, no immediate reaction, just recognition. Awareness of your presence, acknowledged without tension. You lower your gaze slightly, offering a quiet respect, then remain still. There is a lesser-known detail that appears in some accounts. Many indigenous communities developed highly efficient ways of moving across and living within these landscapes using knowledge of seasons, water sources, and animal patterns that had been refined over generations. What might seem harsh or unfamiliar to newcomers was for them part of a deeply understood system. You observe the way they move, the subtle shifts in posture, the way hands gesture softly as they speak. The rhythm of their interaction feels different from what you have seen in the settlement. Less hurried, more connected to the space around them. A voice rises briefly, calm and measured. You do not understand the words, but the tone carries meaning. It feels grounded, steady, as if shaped by something older than the moment itself. You listen not to interpret, but simply to be present. Academic discussions continue to explore the complex interactions between settlers and indigenous nations during this period, with perspectives ranging widely depending on the sources and experiences being considered. Some emphasize conflict and displacement. Others highlight moments of exchange and adaptation. Standing here, you feel the weight of that complexity without needing to resolve it. A figure near the fire adjusts something at the edge of the flame, adding a small piece of wood with a careful motion. The fire responds quietly, its light shifting its warmth, extending slightly outward. The scent of smoke reaches you different from the one you have grown used to. Lighter somehow, mixed with the faint aroma of something cooking, though the details remain subtle. You notice how the space is arranged. Items placed with intention. Tools within reach but not scattered. Everything has a place, and that place feels earned, not improvised. You take a slow breath, letting the air settle in your lungs. It feels calmer here. Not easier, not softer, but balanced in a way that is difficult to define. A small movement catches your attention. A child seated near one of the figures shifts slightly, leaning closer to the warmth of the fire. The gesture is familiar, echoing what you saw earlier in the settlement, and yet it carries a different tone here. The same human need expressed within a different rhythm. You remain still, allowing the moment to unfold without intrusion. The figure who first noticed you speaks again, this time more directly, though still calm. A gesture follows, subtle but clear. Not an invitation to come closer, but an acknowledgement that you are seen, that your presence is understood. You nod slightly in return. No more is needed. You stand there for a few moments longer, letting the quiet settle around you. The firelight shifting gently, the voices rubbing and falling in soft pattern. Then slowly you take a step back. Another, maintaining the distance, the respect, the understanding that this is not your space to enter without purpose. You turn your movements unhurried and begin to walk back toward the settlement. Behind you, the fire continues to burn. The voices continue. The presence remains. Ahead, the faint glow of lanterns marks the place you have come from, the place you are returning to, even as your understanding of it has shifted. The frontier, you realize, is not a single story. It is many, layered, interwoven, and you're only seeing a small part of it. You walk back towards the settlement, the quiet presence you just left behind settling into your thoughts like a layer that does not easily fade. The lantern light ahead feels warmer, now more familiar, yet you notice it differently, not as the centre of everything, but as one part of a much wider world. As you approach, the sounds return in gentle waves, a murmur of voices, the creak of wood, the faint clink of metal against metal. Nothing sharp, nothing sudden, just the continuation of life in small, steady motions. Near the edge of the settlement, you notice something you had not paid much attention to before. A cluster of people gathered around a low table, their belongings arranged with care. The objects stand out slightly from what you have seen elsewhere. Different shapes, different materials, a subtle variation that draws your attention. You step closer, curiosity guiding you. A man stands behind the table, his hands resting lightly on its surface. His clothing is neat, though worn from travel. The fabric is different in cut and colour, suggesting a place of origin beyond this immediate landscape. Nearby, another figure adjusts a bundle, revealing items wrapped carefully in cloth. A grounded historical account highlights that the frontier was shaped not only by settlers from the eastern United States, but also by immigrants from many parts of the world, including Europe, Mexico, and China. Each group brought skills, traditions, and knowledge that influence the development of these communities. You glance at the items laid out before you. Small tools finely made, a piece of fabric with a pattern you do not recognize, a container that holds something with a faint, unfamiliar scent. Each object carries a story that reaches beyond this place. The man lifts one of the items, showing it to another person standing nearby. Their conversation is quiet but animated in its own restrained way. Words pass between them, some familiar, others shaped by accents or languages you do not fully understand. You listen not for meaning but for tone. There is negotiation here, exchange, the careful balancing of value and need. There is a subtle detail noted in some records of the time. Immigrant communities often formed networks of support, sharing resources and knowledge in ways that helped them adapt to unfamiliar environments. These connections were not always visible to outsiders, but they played a significant role in survival. You notice a second table nearby where another group has gathered. The items here are different again. Bright fabrics folded neatly. Small containers of spices or dried goods, their scents faint but distinct in the air. A woman stands behind this table, her posture calm, her movements precise as she arranges and rearranges the display. You step a little closer, drawn by the variation. The scents reach you more clearly now. Something warm, slightly sweet. These, something sharper, almost earthy. They mix with the familiar smells of the frontier, creating a layered atmosphere that feels both new and grounded. Academic inquiry continues to explore how cultural exchange on the frontier shaped daily life, with some suggesting that these interactions led to blending of practices, while others note that distinct traditions often remained intact within separate communities. Observing this scene, you sense both patterns at once. A small exchange takes place at the table. An item is handed over. In return, coins change hands, their movement quick but deliberate. A nod follows, a quiet acknowledgement of agreement. You notice how the interaction mirrors others you have seen, yet carries its own tone. Slightly more formal, perhaps, or simply shaped by different expectations. You shift your gaze to the people themselves, their faces, their clothing, their gestures. Each one adds to the sense that this place is not as uniform as it might appear at first glance. It is a meeting point, a place where paths cross, sometimes briefly, sometimes for longer. There is a curious lesser-known observation from some frontier accounts. Certain foods and techniques introduced by immigrant groups gradually became part of local practice, even if their origins were not always recognized. A spice here, a method there, small changes that shaped daily life over time. You watch as the woman at the second table prepares a small portion of something from one of her containers, offering it to a nearby customer. The gesture is simple, but it carries a quiet confidence, an invitation to experience something unfamiliar. The customer hesitates for a moment, then accepts, a brief taste, a pause, then a nod. Understanding does not always require words. You take a slow breath, the mixed scents settling into your senses. The air feels richer here, layered with traces of places far beyond the horizon. You realize that the frontier is not just expanding outward. It is drawing inward as well. People, traditions, skills, all converging in ways that are not always obvious, but always present. You step back slightly, giving space to the exchanges unfolding around you. The conversations continue low and steady, the movement of goods, of ideas, of small moments of connection. You glance once more at the tables, the items arranged with care, the hands that move them, the eyes that assess their value. Then you turn your steps slow and thoughtful as you move back toward the more familiar parts of the settlement. Behind you, the quiet marketplace continues. Ahead, the firelight waits, and within you, a new layer of understanding settles gently into place. This is not just a land of distance and survival. It is a place where many worlds meet, and where each leaves its mark, however small, on the life that continues to unfold. You drift away from the low tables and quiet exchanges, carrying with you the faint mix of unfamiliar scents and soft voices. The settlement settles back into something more familiar as you move, but the air feels cooler now, the warmth of the early hours slipping away with steady intention. The wind returns, not the gentle movement you felt before, but something sharper. It presses more firmly against your coat, slipping through small openings, finding its way to your skin with quiet persistence. You pull the fabric closer around you, your body responding without thought. You look up. The sky is clear, wide, filled with stars that seem brighter now that the last traces of warmth have faded. There is no cloud cover to soften the night, no barrier between you and the open sky. You take a slow breath and the air feels colder as it enters your lungs. A broadly accepted historical perspective notes that winters on the frontier could be severe, especially on the plains where little natural shelter existed to block wind or retain heat. Even outside the coldest months, nights could bring sharp drops in temperature that caught the unprepared off guard. You begin to feel it now, not as a sudden shock, but as a gradual tightening. Your fingers stiffen slightly. Your breath becomes more visible, faint at first, then clearer as the temperature continues to fall. You move toward one of the cabins, drawn by the idea of shelter. As you approach, you notice the small signs of preparation. A piece of cloth tucked into the edge of a doorframe. A stack of wood placed carefully within reach. A window covered from the inside its edges, sealed as best as possible. You pause outside for a moment listening. Inside you hear movement, soft, steady, the shifting of fabric, the faint crackle of a contained fire. You step back, choosing not to enter but observing from where you stand. There is a lesser-known detail recorded in some accounts of frontier life. People often layered their clothing at night, wearing multiple garments while they slept to conserve body heat, especially when fuel for fires was limited or had to be rationed carefully. You glance down at your own coat, adjusting it again, feeling the way it traps what warmth it can. The wind presses against the cabin walls, testing them. You hear a faint creak, a subtle shift in the wood as it responds to the pressure. It holds, but not without effort. You step away and move toward a more open area where a small fire has been built outside. It burns low, controlled, its flames kept close to the ground. A figure sits nearby, feeding it carefully, adding small pieces of wood rather than large ones. The approach is deliberate. Conserve, maintain, do not waste. Research into frontier survival strategies indicates that managing fuel was as important as securing food or water, particularly in colder conditions. Fire provided warmth, but also required constant attention to ensure it lasted through the night. You crouch near the fire, extending your hands toward it. The warmth reaches you, slowly seeping into your skin, easing the stiffness that has begun to settle in your fingers. The figure tending the fire does not look at you directly, but shifts slightly to make space. It is a quiet acknowledgement and unspoken permission to share the warmth. You sit beside them, the ground firm and cold beneath you. The heat from the fire contrasts sharply with the air just beyond its reach, creating a small pocket of comfort in an otherwise cooling world. There is a subtle, often overlooked aspect of these nights. Sound changes with temperature. The air feels sharper and distant noises carry more clearly. You hear the herd again, their low movements more distinct now. A rider's voice drifts faintly across the distance, still steady, still present. You listen, letting the sound settle. The wind, the fire, the distant rhythm of life continuing. You feel your body adjusting, conserving energy, your movements slowing naturally as the cold encourages stillness. A figure nearby pulls a blanket tighter around their shoulders, the fabric thick but worn. You notice the edges frayed in places, repaired in others. It has been used, relied upon, trusted. There is a curious detail mentioned in some personal writings. In extreme conditions, people sometimes slept in close proximity to one another, or even near animals, to share warmth, creating small pockets of heat where none would exist otherwise. You glance toward the cabins again, imagining the space inside, the closeness, the shared warmth, the quiet negotiation of comfort. Scholarly discussions often explore how environmental pressures shaped social behavior on the frontier, with some suggesting that harsh conditions encouraged cooperation, while others note that resources could also create tension. Sitting here, you sense the balance between the two. The fire shifts as another piece of wood is added. The flames rise slightly, then settle again, their movement steady and controlled. You take a slow breath, the air cool against your face, warm against your hands. The night deepens, the cold settles further, and yet within this small circle of light there is a kind of stability. Not comfort in the way you might define it elsewhere, but enough warmth, enough shelter enough presence to carry you through until morning. You sit quietly, your body still, your mind gradually easing into the rhythm of the night. And as you do, you begin to understand that survival here is not about eliminating discomfort. It is about working with it, adjusting, adapting, enduring. You sit by the low fire a little longer, letting its warmth settle into your hands and along your sleeves. The cold does not disappear, but it becomes something you can manage, something that no longer presses quite as sharply. Around you, the night holds steady, the settlement breathing in a slower, quieter rhythm. After a time you rise again. Your legs feel stiff at first, then gradually ease as you take a few careful steps. The ground has cooled, the firmness of it more noticeable now through the soles of your boots. Each movement feels deliberate, shaped by the awareness that energy must be used carefully. You begin walking toward a smaller structure near the center of the settlement, one you may have passed earlier without much thought. It does not stand out in any obvious way. Its walls are simple, its shape unremarkable, and yet there is a steady flow of movement around it that draws your attention. People come and go quietly. You step closer. A lantern hangs beside the door, its light steady and practical. Not bright, not decorative, just enough to see by. As you approach, you notice a small wooden box mounted near the entrance, its surface worn smooth by repeated use. You recognize it slowly. Mail! A well-established historical understanding explains that the arrival of mail on the frontier was often irregular, dependent on the distance, weather, and the availability of transport. Letters could also take weeks or even months to arrive, carrying news that was already old, yet still deeply important. You pause beside the box, running your fingers lightly along its edge. The wood is cool, slightly rough in places, but shaped by countless hands that have done exactly what you are doing now. Touching, waiting, hoping. Inside the building you hear soft voices. The careful exchange of names, perhaps. The rustle of paper. The subtle shift of movement as people step forward and then away. You step inside. The air is warmer here, though not by much. It carries the faint scent of paper, ink, and wood. A small table stands near the center, and behind it a figure sorts through a stack of envelopes, their movement steady and precise. Each letter is handled with care. You notice how the people inside stand differently from those in other parts of the settlement. There is a quiet anticipation in their posture. A slight tension, not of fear but of expectation. A person steps forward, their name spoken softly. A letter is handed over. For a moment they do not open it. They simply hold it. You watch as their fingers trace the edge of the surface as if confirming that it is real. Then slowly they break the seal. There is a subtle detail that appears in some personal accounts. Letters were often read multiple times, their contents memorized, carried in pockets, or kept close, serving as a lasting connection to people and places far away. You observe the expression on the person's face as they read. It shifts slightly, not dramatically, but enough to suggest something deeper, relief, perhaps, or longing, or both at once. You step aside, giving space as they move away, still holding the letter carefully. Another name is called. Another envelope passed. The pattern continues. Research into frontier communication highlights how vital these exchanges were, not just for information, but for emotional connection. In a place defined by distance, a single letter could bridge that gap, if only for a moment. You move toward a small shelf along the wall, where a few items are displayed. Not for sale, but for use. Paper limited in supply, a small container of ink, a pen worn but functional. You pick it up briefly, feeling its lightness, the slight imbalance in its shape. You imagine the act of writing here, choosing words carefully, knowing that each one matters because it may be a long time before another letter can be sent. There is a lesser-known observation recorded in some writings. Some settlers would draft letters in stages, adding to them over days or weeks, collecting thoughts until an opportunity arose to send them. You set the pen back down gently. Nearby, someone sits at the table, their head bent slightly forward as they write. Their movements are slow, deliberate. The scratching of the pen against paper creates a soft, steady sound that fills the quiet space. You listen for a moment. It feels almost like breathing. A quiet release of thought onto something that can carry it beyond this place. You take a slow breath, the air settling in your chest, carrying with it the faint scent of ink and paper. A figure enters, brushing off a bit of dust before stepping forward. They wait patiently, their gaze fixed on the table, on the stack of letters, on the possibility that something there might belong to them. You notice how no one rushes. Even in anticipation, there is patience. It has to be this way. The frontier does not move quickly even when it tries. You step back towards the door, the cooler air outside visible in the slight movement of the lantern flame. Before leaving, you take one last look at the room, at the letters, at the hands that hold them, at the quiet exchange of connection that reaches far beyond the boundaries of this place. Then you step outside again. The night greets you once more, cool and steady. Behind you, the small building continues its quiet work. Ahead, the settlement rests in its slow rhythm. And within you, something lingers, a sense that even here, in a place defined by distance and effort, people carry pieces of other worlds with them, folded into paper, sealed with care, and held close long after the words have been read. You step away from the small post room, the image of folded letters and careful handwriting still resting quietly in your thoughts. The night has deepened, though not entirely, into silence. The settlement hums at a lower level now, its energy softened, its movements fewer but still present. You walk slowly along the main stretch where the wooden planks meet the packed earth. The sounds here feel distant even when they are close. A voice carries briefly, then fades. A door closes somewhere behind you with a soft, final tone. The air feels clearer now. Colder, yes, but also more still. You pause near a building you passed earlier, one that did not draw much attention at the time. Its windows are dark, but a faint light flickers inside just enough to suggest activity. You move closer, curiosity guiding you once again. Through a narrow gap in the curtain you see movement. Inside, a man sits at a table leaning slightly forward. Papers are spread before him, uneven stacks held in place by small objects. A pen rests in his hand, moving steadily across the surface. He is writing, not a letter this time, something longer. You watch quietly, careful not to disturb the moment. A well-recognized historical observation notes that printed materials such as newspapers and pamphlets began to appear even in remote frontier towns, often produced with limited resources, but serving as important tools for sharing news, shaping opinions, and connecting communities to broader narratives. You shift your position slightly, catching a clearer view. Beside the man, a small press sits against the wall. It is simple, not large or elaborate, but functional, the kind of tool that requires patience and care to operate. You realize what you're looking at. A local paper, perhaps, or something close to it. The man pauses, lifting the pen briefly as he considers his next line. His gaze moves across the page, then returns his hand, continuing its steady motion. There is a subtle detail that appears in some accounts. Early frontier publications were not always strictly factual by modern standards. They often blended news with opinion storytelling and even exaggeration, shaping how events were understood by those who read them. You watch as he finishes the line, then sets the pen down for a moment, flexing his fingers slightly. The movement is small, but it carries the weight of repetition of work done over long hours. He reaches for another sheet, placing it carefully in front of him. You find yourself wondering what stories are being told here. What details are chosen? What is emphasized? What is left out? Scholarly inquiry continues to explore how narratives of the American West were constructed, particularly through written accounts that transformed complex realities into more defined stories. Some interpretations suggest that these early writings played a role in shaping the myth of the frontier, turning ordinary lives into something more dramatic, more appealing to those far away. You glance around the room again, noticing small details. A stack of previously printed pages, their edges slightly uneven. A container of ink, its surface dark and reflective. A cloth used to clean the press, marked with traces of repeated use. Each item contributes to the process. Each one part of how a story becomes something that can be shared. You take a slow breath, the cool air outside mixing with the faint warmth that escapes through the gap in the curtain. Inside, the man resumes writing, his focus steady, his posture unchanged. You imagine the path of those words, from his hand to the page, to the press, then outward, carried by travellers, by trains, by chance. A curious, often overlooked detail from the period suggests that some exaggerated tales of frontier life began as small embellishments in local writings, gradually growing as they were repeated and retold, eventually shaping the larger image of the West in distant places. You think of the cowboys you saw earlier, the quiet work, the steady movement, the long hours that did not ask for attention, and you wonder how they might appear in these pages. You step back slightly, letting the curtain fall fully into place again. The view inside disappears, but the sense of it remains. The idea that what happens here does not stay here. It travels, it changes, it becomes something else. You turn slowly, your steps measured as you move away from the building. The settlement feels quieter now, as if settling into the final stretch of night. The fires burn lower, the voices fade further, the movements become fewer. You walk along the path, your attention drifting between what you have seen and what it might become in the telling. The frontier, you realize, is not only lived, it is remembered, described, interpreted, and sometimes reshaped. You take another slow breath, the cool air filling your lungs. The stars above remain steady. The land stretches outward unchanged. But the stories within it begin to shift even as they are being written. You continue walking, carrying with you the quiet understanding that the version of this place that survives may not be the one you have just experienced, but something close to it, something shaped by memory, by voice, by the need to make sense of it all. And as the night deepens further, you move gently toward its final hours, the rhythm of the frontier slowing around you. You walk slowly, almost without thinking, now your steps guided by the soft familiarity of the ground beneath you. The settlement has quieted into something close to stillness. Not silence, never entirely that, but a gentler version of what it was before. The fires have burned low, the voices have softened, the movements have slowed. You find a place near the edge of the camp where the land opens again, where the faint glow of lanterns sits behind you and the wide, dark expanse stretches out ahead. You lower yourself carefully to the ground, the earth cool but steady beneath you. For a moment you simply sit. The night air brushes lightly against your face, carrying with it the faint traces of smoke, dry grass, and distant animals. The herd still moves somewhere out there, though you cannot see it clearly now. You only hear it, a low, continuous presence that blends into the rhythm of the night. A widely accepted historical understanding reflects that life on the frontier was shaped not by constant action, but by long stretches of waiting, watching, and enduring. The dramatic moments existed, but they were rare compared to the steady, unremarkable passage of days. You feel that now, not excitement, not urgency, but a kind of quiet continuation. You lean back slightly, resting your hands against the ground, your gaze lifting toward the sky. The stars stretch above you in a vast, unbroken field, their light steady and distant. Without the interruption of artificial light, they feel closer, more present, as if the sky itself has lowered just a little. You take a slow breath, then another. Your body begins to settle, the tension of movement fading into stillness. There is a small, almost unexpected detail recorded in some personal accounts. People living in these wide open spaces often developed a heightened awareness of the night sky, not just for navigation, but as a constant companion in environments where human presence could feel small and temporary. You watch the stars without trying to name them, just letting them be. Behind you, a faint sound reaches your ears. A door closing softly, a final adjustment to a fire. The quiet murmur of someone speaking in low tone before falling silent again. The settlement is resting, not fully asleep, but close. You feel the coolness of the air deepen, slightly settling more firmly around you. Your coat holds what warmth it can, and your body adjusts, finding a position that feels stable, sustainable. Scholars have long reflected on how the mythology of the American West often emphasizes action and heroism, while the lived experience contained far more stillness, repetition, and quiet endurance. Sitting here, the truth of that observation feels simple and clear. The frontier is not always loud, it's often quiet. You close your eyes for a moment listening. The wind moves softly across the land. The distant herd shifts. The faint crackle of a dying fire reaches you in small, irregular intervals. Each sound spaced out, unhurried. You open your eyes again, your gaze returning to the sky. There is nothing you need to do, no task waiting for you, no movement required. Just this moment, this place, this quiet. You feel your breathing slow, further deep, and even matching the rhythm around you. The ground beneath you feels more familiar now, no longer foreign or uncertain. The air, though cool, no longer feels sharp. It simply exists and you exist within it. There is a gentle fading at the edges of your awareness, as if the details of the day are beginning to soften, to blur slightly into one another. You think briefly of the things you have seen. The open plains, the cabins, the cattle, the fire, the people, each one distinct and yet part of the same continuous flow. Then even those thoughts begin to drift. The night continues steady and unchanging, and you remain within it, no longer observing, no longer analysing. Just present, just still. Your body grows heavier against the ground, your muscles releasing what tension remains. Your hands rest loosely, your shoulders settling, your breathing quiet and slow. The sounds become softer, the space feels wider, and the sense of effort that carried you through the day fades into something gentler. A calm, a quiet, a kind of rest that does not ask anything more from you. You let your eyes close again this time, without the need to open them. The stars remain above, unseen but steady. The land stretches outward unchanged. The settlement rests behind you, held together by the same quiet strength you have felt throughout the night. And you at the edge of it all begin to drift, slowly, gently, carried by the steady rhythm of a world that continues whether you are awake to see it or not. You remain there, your breath slow and even, the night air cool against your skin but no longer sharp. The world around you feels softer now, its edges less defined, its movements distant and gentle. The sounds fade further. The wind becomes a whisper. The land becomes a presence rather than a place. You feel safe here in a quiet, simple way. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to carry. Just rest, just stillness, just the steady, unbroken rhythm of the frontier at night. And as that rhythm continues, you let yourself sink a little deeper into it. Your thoughts quiet, your body at ease, your awareness slowly drifting into a softer space where the details no longer matter, where the story fades into calm, where the day releases its hold, and where sleep comes not suddenly but gently, like the slow settling of dust after a long journey. Sweet dreams.